How's it going, everyone? Want to go over some Dragon Ball Sparking Zero updates, and this is making the rounds quite a lot, and it is something negative about the game that I'll try to provide some context, as I like to say, when it comes to assessing data, but it certainly is something worth talking about, and that is the steep decline of the concurrent player count on Steam as far as Dragon Ball Sparking Zero goes. Why that's a big problem, and why, let me reiterate something that I've been wanting out of this game for so long that I did videos on prior to the release of the game, and a lot of you guys push back on me. Look, I got thin skin when you guys hate on me for criticizing one of my favorite games of the year, Sparking Zero. I know a lot of people were super excited for it and still are really enjoying it, but there's an element of the game that does beg to question the longevity of it. We'll talk about that. And on top of that, why that same element isn't that big of a deal for the success of the game. We'll talk that in a little bit. But yes, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, it has been apparent that the game's Steam concurrent player count has fallen off steeply. Now, this is something we talk about in gaming quite a lot when it comes to assessing Steam concurrent player counts. This has become very popular because, you know, online it's all about pushing narratives. You want to push the narrative and you can manipulate and twist data however you want, but it's important to always offer context to the data. What I always say is data is great. Having as much data and information as possible is always fantastic. Why do we have data? Why do we study data? It is to learn, and to properly learn off of data, you need to provide context. So, the all-time concurrent player peak for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was 31 days ago at 122,554. Obviously, much like any other game, a month later, it has seen quite the fall off. It is now about 11,900 players concurrently as I am recording this video. It peaked at 16,000 over the last 24 hours. So 90% of the player count, that is the number that is being thrown around, has fallen off from playing Sparking Zero. Now, let me reiterate, as I always say when studying concurrent player counts, games will always, and I mean always, fall off in concurrent player counts, and they will fall off steeply. When it comes to a game like Sparking Zero that isn't a live service title, yes, it might have multiplayer. That does not mean it's a live service game. It is not inundated with microtransactions or anything like that. It is not getting regular content updates that make you come back every week to play the game. It doesn't have a battle pass, anything like that. It is not a live service game. Games like this will always fall off in concurrent player count. But how steeply do they generally fall off? Well, it's interesting to study because 90% is quite the steep fall off, but it isn't unheard of out of games. For example, last month, Silent Hill 2 also came out, and it peaked at 23,676 concurrent players. Right now, there's about 4,000 people playing the game, and it peaked at around 4,200 over the last 24 hours. So that's a significant drop-off as well. You know, Silent Hill 2 is a shorter game, but, you know, it's still a number to assess. Metaphor Refantasio peaked at 85,000, 86,000 just about 28 days ago when it came out. Right now, it's about 18,000 concurrent players. So that game has lost 80% of its concurrent player base, or about 80% if my math is correct. Sometimes I'm a little bit off. I believe it would actually work out to around 75%. See, this is why we don't do second grade level math live while recording videos. But you get the idea. Steep fall-offs are fairly normal, and this isn't a live service game, but 90% is big. That is bigger than a Metaphor. That is bigger than a Silent Hill 2. What I will say about that is Sparking Zero had a lot of hype and anticipation going into its release, and I think a big part of that was nostalgia. I think nostalgia is very, very underrated when it comes to curating hype and anticipation for a game. I would also argue that nostalgia ultimately does have a very short shelf life. That's just the reality. I've noticed this with anything that comes back from a nostalgic standpoint. Nostalgia will lead into there being a lot of hype, will carry you for a little bit, but ultimately, sustainability requires something else. And even with this game losing 90% of its concurrent player count, it's not like it's a dead game. However, we are only a month after the release of the game. You guys, a month after the release of the game and being down to 12,000 players on PC, I don't know what the concurrent player count on the Xbox is, but I would imagine it's around the same level of PC, maybe higher, maybe lower, I don't know. We don't have that data available. It would be great to have that data, but this goes back to the point where you cannot expect every game like this to have a healthy player base perpetually, month after month, year after year, and that's why cross-platform play, to create a healthy player base, to create the most healthy player base possible, is so important, especially if you're buying the game on PC or Xbox. Maybe it's not a big deal if you're playing on PlayStation 5, which I get it. The bulk of our audience and the bulk of the general audience playing Sparking Zero are going to be on PlayStation 5. However, you're selling the game on PC, you're selling the game on Xbox, cross-platform play has become such a standard. I don't care what they say about the netcode and all this stuff. It's the standard in gaming. So many games have cross-platform play, but generally speaking, it is these Bandai Namco published anime titles, these arena fighters, that do not get cross-platform play. And even if you can say, oh, 12,000 is a healthy number, at a baseline level, even if this game was still at 120,000 concurrent players, cross-platform play is a net positive across the board. If you want to say something like, oh my god, I gotta deal with cheaters, generally speaking, cross-platform play is a toggle that you can turn on and off. If I'm on PC and playing the game and my boy's on PlayStation, at this point in 2024, I should be able to play with them. And not only that, that would offer a sense of longevity for the game. 6 months from now, when this game sees its first discount and it's 30% off or whatever on Steam, Xbox Store, and PlayStation Store, if you're on Xbox and PC and you're reading some of the Steam reviews and people are saying, oh, it's a little bit difficult to find a game online, that's pushing people away from buying the game and ultimately lessening the long-term success of the game. Yes, the game is an immense success. We'll talk about that in a second, but you want to keep this game in the news cycle, you want to perpetually sell this game, it would be beneficial all across the board. There is no negatives to having cross-platform play. That's why I am so shocked that people, you can be defensive about the game to an extent, but I'm asking for something that would be a net positive for the game. I'm criticizing it because I want better, the best possible. Sparking Zero is legitimately a contender for me for Game of the Year. That is how strongly I think about this game. And yes, there's a little bit of bias attached to that, being a lifelong Tenkaichi fan, but I also want this game to have a healthy long-term, long-term outlook as well. And there are other updates certainly to be made, but the dwindling player count does reinforce my point that so many of you were like, oh my god, this game doesn't need it. What are you talking about? This ain't a big deal. Just buy it on PlayStation. Yes, you can. Yes, it's available on PlayStation. Not everybody has a PlayStation. It's available on PC and Xbox. The game is being sold for $70. Let's get it up to a 2024 standard and get cross-platform play in there. I think it would just be beneficial for the long-term outlook of the game. Yes, there are other updates that are necessary for the game, but I digress. Let me also say that while, yes, it has lost 90% of its concurrent player count on Steam, this game is a resounding success. Why is that? Because this isn't a live service game. This isn't a game that is predicated on keeping players attached to the experience forever and ever. Guess what? 122,000 peaked back in 31 days ago on Steam. All 122,000 of those people paid $70 or even $100 for the deluxe edition. They got your money. This isn't a free-to-play game. The game is a resounding success. It sold 3 million copies just like that. This game's success cannot be quantified in terms of how successful it is. Yes, we have this sales number, but we don't know how many more copies it has sold since then, and it is a resounding success, especially when you look at arena fighters in the past, anime arena fighters. This is a monumental success. Even with the dwindling player count, again, it's gonna still continue to sell copies, and it sold a $100 deluxe edition that I know a lot of people picked up. Bandai Namco made an absolute killing on this game, and they themselves are saying that the game saw outstanding sales, and Bandai Namco says roughly 90% of that was from European and North American fans, which I do find a little bit interesting. It sold 3 million copies within 24 hours of its launch, the biggest Dragon Ball Steam launch ever, and so on and so forth. It just broke a ton of records, and the game is a resounding success. However, just because it was a success in a vacuum on launch day, which it absolutely was. I want continued success out of the game. I want the necessary updates. I want cross-platform play. I want things to go in a better direction for the long-term health of the game. But that'll do it for me. Again, wanted to offer some context to the data that is available. I do think that 90% player decline is steep. That's bigger than a lot of the other games that you'll see. Silent Hill 2, Metaphor. They're different games in that they're single-player-oriented titles, and Sparking Zero, maybe you can make the argument that it should have a less steep of a decline, given that it does have a multiplayer focus to it. That argument is absolutely there to be made. But what I do know is with this steep of a decline, I'm curious where it's going to be 6 months from now, and that's why I think cross-platform play is so absolutely necessary for a game like this. But that'll do it for me. Again, your thoughts down below. That doesn't mean this game is a failure. Far from it. This is one of the biggest success stories of the year. But interested to hear what all of you think. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.